Joining me from the 6th Congressional District is Mike Coffman. Mike, thanks again for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And from the 1st Congressional District, the Dean of the Delegation, Diana DeGette. Diana, thank you.
Good to be with you.
And our fresh person from the 4th Congressional District, none other than Corey Gardner. Corey, great to see you.
Hey, great to see you. Thanks for having us.
My pleasure. And from the 7th Congressional District, none other than Ed Perlmutter. Ed, thanks for being here.
Aaron, thanks for having us.
All right, let's pick up our conversation, and we were about to talk about tax simplification. But I want to jump to a personal side first. Tell me about the Colorado delegation. We've got 4 Republicans, 3 Democrats. Do you all see each other a lot in Washington? Do you interact? Do you help each other? Do you fight each other? Give me a Corey, what's your experience?
As a freshman member of this delegation, I think it's important, and I've seen a lot of other delegations that are completely dysfunctional. And that's not between Republicans and Democrats. I mean, that's between Republicans and Republicans or Democrats and Democrats. But the Colorado delegation, although we don't agree eye to eye on everything, see eye to eye or agree on everything, we do get along well and we work well together. And there's a lot of things that we do agree on and a lot of things that we are committed to work with each other on. And that's been a great thing to be a part of.
You know, one thing is, as the senior member of the delegation, I'll say we've always had a view, and House and Senate, ever since I came to Congress, we have a small delegation, so we really need to work closely together for the benefit of the state. We try to meet once a month and have breakfast together, and we talk about issues that really are meaningful to all of us. One of the things we're working on a lot right now is the pine beetle infestation, and what do we do to try to get federal government help to remediate that. Transportation issues, a lot of issues that affect the state, and we all really do like each other, so that helps too. We're, you know, as Corey says, we're not always going to agree, but at least we feel like we can have a civil discourse.
You know, and I just want to thank Diana DeGette as the Dean of the Delegation for setting a tone and some parameters in terms of, you know, certainly not attacking each other, particularly in a personal way, and I think you see that in the media. And we can have some, and it's amazing, I'm just stunned at how well everybody gets along, that even if we get into divisive issues, that off the floor, it just ends. And I can tell you, as somebody who's worked at the state legislature, and in fact, all of us have, that doesn't necessarily occur. And people think that it's much more divisive in Congress than they do at the state level, but actually, my experience is working with this delegation has been the reverse.
Yeah.
And that is interesting. One of the things when I was looking at the collection of you 4, you all have been in the Colorado General Assembly, and I thought, in fact, most of that applies to most of the delegation. I think Jared is probably an exception.
State school board.
Yeah. So that experience is interesting.
If I could give an example though, where working together really benefited the state. All of us have worked in one way or another on this new VA medical center that's going in out at Fitzsimmons. Huge project, something that's been on the drawing boards for about 40 years. And it serves veterans from Montana to New Mexico. And by all of us working together, we finally are getting that thing done. They, raised buildings, they're ready to start construction, and it's a very complicated, big project, but it took the whole team working together to get it done. And I think that's what, the benefit that comes from the fact that we like each other. We'll disagree and we'll, scrap and scream, but we like working with one another.
All right. Well, in that vein, let's talk about a potentially divisive issue,
okay.
And that's tax simplification. Well, I'm curious why Democrats haven't taken the issue of a flat tax and made it their own. That struck me as politically a really wise move, and I'll mention a couple of numbers. It varies, but the estimates of compliance with our extraordinarily complex 60,000-page tax code ranges from $250 billion upwards to $400 billion a year. It would seem to me that if Democrats proposed going to a flat tax, eliminating the majority of the costs related to tax compliance and saying, we want you to put some of that money into the federal government for deficit reduction, it's a win-win for everybody. People's net cost goes down, the federal government gets a little more revenue, and you're not spending so much time figuring out your taxes. Why haven't Democrats done that?
I'll talk from my perspective. A flat tax is a regressive tax because it'll tax a billionaire the same amount as somebody who makes $30,000 or $40,000 a year. But what I do support is I support a greatly simplified a tiered tax system that would be very simple, maybe 3 or 4 different tiers. And I think we should sit down and talk about that, because I think it would make life a lot easier for taxpayers. It would eliminate a lot of loopholes, and it would potentially bring more revenue in.
Mike?
Yeah, you know, I think that this tax code hurts business. I think it hurts the overall economy, because there's so many incentives and subsidies to business to try to direct their economic behavior that I think they would be the better ones to make their decisions without these incentives. So I think let's simplify the code. In exchange, I think we could lower some of the marginal tax rates, and I think at the end of the day we're going to see more revenue.
Ed?
Well, this may be where you do zero-based budgeting, because every 20 or 30 years we ought to go back and simplify it. We simplified it in the 80s. It had consequences. Changed a lot of deductions that real estate people got, kind of added to an already upset economy back then, and you've got to be prepared for those consequences. But over time, everybody sort of adds to their specific, tax, deductions or credits. And so you need to look at that every 20 or 30 years. So I would agree with the two of them. We need to take a good look at the deductions. The flat tax, it's not that simple. It's where do you set the flat tax? And that's the fight. You were saying, well, we'll just pay down the debt with the flat tax. Sure, at a certain rate you will. But do you think everybody's going to agree on that rate? I'd say that's where there would be a real dispute as to what keeps the economy going, what hurts the economy. But I think we do have to take a good look at the overall code and start cutting back some of the subsidies.
Well, how about the corporate tax? Right now you have a high marginal rate. The top rate's about 35%, but you also have some corporations that aren't paying anything at all. Why not do something simple, such as a 3% tax on gross revenues? So you eliminate all the accounting games, accelerated depreciation, and all the special favors. Lobbyists come to you asking for legislation, so you're kind of getting businesses out of government to some extent if they can't, if those aren't available. And even at just a 3% of gross revenue figure, you would possibly double the revenue that the federal government would generate. Why not do something like that, Corey?
We've got one of the highest corporate tax rates in the world, and if you look at the other nations that have lowered theirs, they've become quite competitive and have been very successful building their economies up as they have gone forward. And so if we could lower our tax rates to be more competitive, I do think you'd see businesses staying in the United States, staying in Colorado instead of moving overseas and locating there to do business. One of the sort of the under talked about parts of the budget that just passed the House is the number of efforts it takes to get rid of tax loopholes and some of the ways people have been getting around it.
So what you're saying, because like GE, one of the largest corporations in the world, paid no income tax last year.
Yeah,
so what you're saying is eliminate the loopholes and actually make them pay taxes but reduce the rate.
Well, I
That's
think
what
if you
you're
look at the
saying.
budget, it actually does a great deal to do that. And if you look at the way people have been getting around it, the budget does just that in many instances. In fact, GE is one of those instances where it didn't pay any taxes, but yet it got millions and millions of dollars from the government through the health care bill handed to them. So it's an interesting thing that they're actually net tax receivers last year from the U.S. government.
Well, I mean, I keep hearing, I ask this question because I keep hearing Republicans say you need to reduce the corporate income tax rate, but I don't hear them say at the same time and eliminate the loopholes.
No, I think you do. I think you have to do it concurrently. What you have to do is, that's part of the tax reform. In fact, Congressman David Camp, chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, is working on such a proposal for tax reform. But I think you do it in exchange. I think because all countries give subsidies, deductions, credits to their corporations, but let's eliminate them in favor of a lower tax rate, because we are not competitive. We have among the highest in the world, I think second to Japan, and Japan is debating lowering theirs. And so it makes the United States uncompetitive, and I think our greatest export right now as a country is jobs.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with our congressional delegation. Colorado Now, our congressional roundtable has been talking about a lot of fiscal issues. One of the issues in Washington that certainly has been getting a lot of coverage is the rancor and how difficult, how separated the parties are and individuals are. So it was refreshing to hear how well the Colorado delegation is getting along. But based on what you're seeing in terms of the political scene today, how serious is the problem in terms of a lack of civility, lack of ability to get along or compromise, and how do you solve that problem? Mike, I'm gonna toss it to you.
Well, I think you know, I think we do need to reform the system. I think that in the United States House of Representatives, it's kind of one-party rule. And now that I'm in the majority, of course, I think that's fine. but it does go too far. And I think that we're, you know, and it's stunning having come from a state legislative level, then going to the Congress of the United States, where, you know, a committee chairman can decide whether or not to hear a bill, that you have to go through a rules committee to get permission to offer an amendment on the floor. None of, you know, and it's an open process at the state level, but it's a pretty closed process in the United States House of Representatives. So I think that probably we need some reform there. And I think that in talking with the Speaker of the House, John Boehner, he's certainly has been more open in moving in that direction. I think when we had the concurrent resolution that any member was allowed to present amendments on the floor, and there were a number of Democrat amendments that did pass in terms of cutting the budget.
Diana, I mean, you've got a more longitudinal view,
well,
shall we say?
You know what I think is, I think a couple things. Number one, and these guys will agree with this, there's a lot more bipartisanship going on in the halls of Congress than people realize. The bill that Ed and Mike are working on together, Corey and I have been talking about some legislation. A couple of years ago when we passed the food safety law, I worked with Joe Barton, who's a conservative Republican from Texas, who was at that time the chairman of our committee. So I think there is a lot of bipartisanship that goes on, but I think around some of the key flash button issues, then you get partisan disagreement. And I will also, I must say, I put part of the blame at the feet of the press, because with the 24-hour news cycle, there always has to be some story, and it has to be, you know, something grabbing. So I tell this story. A few years ago, there was a whole series of articles in the newspaper about an issue that the Colorado delegation disagreed on. And it was an issue that was never going to be brought up for a vote. It was just fun to write the story because they could get me and Mike or me and Corey or whoever disagreeing.
What was the issue?
It was the issue of reparations for slavery. And this is an issue that's never going to come up in Congress, but it generates a lot of controversy. So if we all did the most wonderful Colorado 2012 bill together, and we worked together, and there was no controversy, it'd probably be buried on the last page of the paper. And that's a real issue that we deal with, I think, in Washington.
It would be discussed on a boring show like mine.
Right.
And we only go once a week, so the 24-hour news cycle doesn't matter.
Right.
Let me, Ed, get your 2 cents in here.
I think that there was some exhibition of leadership, you know, where President, the Senate, the House, everybody's wrangling. President said, we've given and we're done. I'm gonna veto this budget if you guys don't get to the table and get real here. And forget about some of your hot button issues, Planned Parenthood or NPR or some of those things. And then everybody got real over the course of a day, 24 hours. So it reflected, one, the president saying, that's enough. This is where I am. Let's get this finished. Then the speaker, got to give him some credit, as well as Harry Reid saying, let's get this finished. And so I was comfortable with what occurred. I wasn't crazy about the budget that came out, but it was a deal. And sometimes you just got to finish the deal.
And go ahead, Corey.
Well, you know, I actually co-authored a op-ed in the Denver Post here a couple of weeks ago with a Democrat member of Congress from Michigan. And I'll never forget some of the emails that I actually got were criticizing me for joining a Democrat in the op-ed. And you know, we've got to realize that these aren't Republican solutions the country needs. It's not Democrat solutions the country needs. They're American solutions that this country needs.
You know, and I think we all look at our niche for leadership in the Congress, and I'm taking on defense issues and cutting out the waste, and that's truly a bipartisan issue where I have to have both sides of the aisle in support of that.
Well, in fact, I mean, when you look at, you know, as I mentioned, when you look at the Ryan proposal, I felt he really dodged the military issue. It probably takes a Republican or Republicans with military experience, such as your own, to lead that charge and to say, we can do things more efficiently, kind of a Nixon to China analogy. When Democrats do that, they get accused of being, soft on the military. So, and I want to talk about those biases when we come back in our final segment. I want to thank my guests for joining me. One of the issues, certainly as you grapple with the financial future of the country, is the concept of shared sacrifice. And my sense is, and I'd like your opinions, my sense is most Americans believe in that concept, are willing to participate in that concept, but don't believe that's what's happening at the federal level. I think they feel that the entities with lobbyists get the money and the little guy gets the short shrift. And if you don't feel things are being done fairly, you're not going to be interested in sacrificing. And that's why I think you see special interest groups so successful in saying, oh, you can't cut Social Security, you can't cut Medicare, can't cut the military, or whatever the case may be. How do we address that? Ed, give me the solution to that challenge. Or have I not accurately framed the challenge?
Well, I think that we do have a challenge of a lot of special interest groups, coming to Washington and expressing their concerns, but that's allowed under the First Amendment to the Constitution, petitioning your government to talk to them about what's important to you. So whether it's teachers coming or the oil companies coming or who knows who's going to be addressing us. I know the other three, we have meetings with different groups all the time, every day, and they each have a different issue. Could be, the Epilepsy Foundation. I have a daughter with epilepsy. So so that resonates with me, obviously. Our job is to try and look at the bigger picture all the time. It's not easy because you have somebody the Epilepsy Foundation, let's just take them. Clearly that's an important issue to me, but I've got to try to look at it in the totality of our budget, our issues, whatever. And so, I'd say to my friends on the Republican side, we really do have to look at subsidies to the oil companies. We have to look hard at whether we're incentivizing exporting of jobs. And, somebody's gonna scream. Likewise, when we take a look at Medicare or Social Security, groups that might find me as a natural ally, and I generally am, I've got to take a good hard look at the overall picture for the country. And it's not easy, but that's our job.
Corey, what's your sense in terms of the public's willingness to sacrifice and their perception that it isn't being done fairly in Washington?
Standard & Poor's just put a negative outlook on the future bond rating of the United States. I think people are waking up realizing, and they did it on November 2nd, realizing that we've got a lot of things that we have to do better in this country. We're in a world of hurt if we don't change course, start cutting spending, start getting our economy back on track. And so, the view that I take is this. In the 4th Congressional District, I am going to work as hard as I can each day to go into my district, whether I'm making phone calls, teleforms, town meetings into that district, talking about the issues at hand, listening to what's on the voter's mind and constituents' mind, and make sure that we're doing the right thing, and then saying, hey, you know what, we are going to have to make tough choices in Medicare, Medicaid, if we're going to save them for future generations. We are going to have to make tough choices, but we can do it, I think, while growing our economy.
But see, this is exactly the question, Aaron, is I think that my constituents and all of our constituents are willing to say, okay, maybe we do need to make some adjustments. With hope, if we do it now, they won't be large adjustments to Medicare or to Social Security. I'm willing to maybe take a little bit less of a Pell Grant or a loan for my college student. But I don't understand why I should have to do that, while at the same time, our budget doesn't do anything about the oil and gas reserves, about taxes for the top 2% of the taxpayers, about offshoring jobs, about the ag subsidies and the Defense Department and all that. That's the problem that most Americans have, is they say, okay, let's have a sacrifice, but let's have that sacrifice by all of us. Let's not take it primarily out of our discretionary spending that spends money for the middle class and out of our programs for senior citizens and others. That's the problem right there. And I think all of us would say, we're budget hawks. We will look at everything on the table, but you can't say, well, we'll look at everything on the table except for these certain things that benefit corporations and the wealthiest Americans.
Mike.
I think the great tragedy of the Congress is that we don't have the tough debates that they have at at state legislatures across this country. And I remember being a state senator, chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, and really, you know, it's prisons or education or it's transportation or some other program that you know, that you had a limited amount of money and you had to prioritize it and you had tough debates to make those decisions, but you made those decisions.
Right, and you're saying that's because with the
There's
state in
a
most
balanced
states,
budget requirement,
right,
and there is no such requirement in the federal government. So whenever we're deadlocked, we just print money. And both sides get their way. Republicans get more spending on defense, and Democrats get more spending on social programs. But the future of the country suffers. And so, you know, but we've got to make the tough decisions. And I think that all of the programs mentioned here today are great programs. But the question is, when you stack them up one another against the resources that we have, that we've got to make some decisions. And so I'm glad to hear that everything ought to be on the table. But we are bumping up against our capacity to borrow. And now is the time to make decisions. And I think people are going to be divided along two lines in the Congress. Those who love being in Congress more than this country versus those that love this country more than being in Congress, because some of these decisions are going to be incredibly popular politically.
All right, but isn't one of the problems as you look historically that people in Congress today, people in the House and the Senate, compared perhaps to 30 or 40 years ago, are more there as career politicians? You don't think that's the case?
No, I think it's always, no, I think people, I mean, one thing I've learned, and Corey and I, it's good we're sitting next to each other because you have the senior and then junior member, but he will agree with this, is Congress is run on the seniority system. And that's something every time a new class of members comes in, Democrat or Republican, they bump up against this and they try to change it. But that being said, there's, you know, people get rehired every 2 years. And from my perspective, and I think all four of us feel this way, we have to go out and tell our constituents every 2 years why they should rehire us.
Ed, you know, when you look at the situation with and let's take a couple issues that Mike has touched on as well. You know, if Republicans say anything about Social Security and changing Social Security, Democrats jump down their throats, which make Republicans gun shy to do much, and of course Democrats won't do much at all. If a Democrat says, you know, we need to really take a hard look at military spending, Republicans jump down their throats in turn. Is there any way to change that dynamic? Because unless you change that dynamic, you're not going to see significant movement of those numbers.
Well, all I can say is, going back to the fall of 2008, when the national interest, in my opinion, was forefront for everybody. You can bet George Bush didn't want to ask the Congress to post $800 billion for the financial system. And you can bet the Democrats in the Congress didn't want to support the president in that effort, except that we saw the national interest at heart. Whether you can say it worked or it didn't work, but we all saw the national interest. There are times when that really has to take front and center. On this budget issue, we have a lot of debt out there. And we really got to look at our revenue, and we really have to look at our expenses. It's got to be both sides of the ledger. And it's the national interest. And the national interest, just like Mike was saying, has to take front and center, both in the short-term expenses that we have, the long-term obligations, and the fairness of how it's paid.
Corey, when you look at, I know we only have 2 minutes left in the show, but when you look, when you look at the Simpson-Bowles proposal, what was your thought? And do we, when you look at a solution to the deficit issue, isn't getting additional tax revenue going to be a critical portion of that?
Look, if you have done nothing to tame the spending, then you're going to have your same problem in 5, 10, 20 years. I believe you've got to do first things first, and that means you got to control spending and prove that Congress can do the right thing with the money it already has before it's given even more. It goes back to that example. When I was a kid, my parents wouldn't give me more of an allowance if I wasted my money.
Mike, additional revenues, does that have to be part of the solution, especially if there's any compromise?
Absolutely, additional revenues from a growing economy.
All right, Diane, I'm going to give you, looking at the expression on your face, I'm going to give you the last word.
Well, I mean, you see, you can't say to middle-class people, we're only going to cut programs that you rely on without looking at the whole economy. And so I don't think the Simpson-Bowles proposal was perfect, but it was a Republican and a Democrat, and I agreed actually with a lot of their principles. I would hope that what would happen now that the president has put his proposal out, Congressman Ryan has advanced his, and we've got several others, including our House budget, let's sit down and really talk about it. Let's talk about a balanced approach, something that will have sacrifice by everybody, but be targeted at what our #1 goal should be right now in this country, and that is jobs. Creating jobs for all Americans so we can get this unemployment rate down and have our economy grow.
All right, I want to thank Mike Coffman, Diana DeGette, Corey Gardner, and Ed Perlmutter for joining me today. We'll reconvene in several months and see where we are on these issues. This is Aaron Harber. Thanks for watching Colorado Now. If